How does a girl born into California sunlight end up searching for herself in prescription bottles and silence? What was living behind the smile that sold millions of magazine covers? What happens when the performance that saved you becomes the prison that traps you? And what does a woman do when the version of herself that the world loves is the only version she no longer recognizes? To understand all of that, we need to go back to the beginning, to Westwood, California, to September 25th, 1961, and to a girl who learned, in the softest and most suffocating way possible, that being loved meant first being pleasing. Heather Dean Locklear was born in Westwood, Los Angeles, into a family that carried the particular weight of middle-class stability and its accompanying pressures. Her father, William Locklear, worked in university administration at UCLA. Her mother, Diane, managed the rhythms of a household that prized appearance, order, and composure. There were no gray streets here, no survival arithmetic. But there was something else, a different kind of pressure, quieter and harder to name. The pressure of a home where everything looked fine, and therefore had to remain looking fine. Heather was the youngest of 4 children, raised in the San Fernando Valley in a world of suburban lawns and school fundraisers and the unspoken rule that difficult feelings were best dissolved into politeness. Her father was a disciplined, emotionally restrained man whose love was real but rarely expressed in language a child could hold on to. Her mother was warm but overwhelmed by the machinery of keeping everything together. There was no luxury, no industry connections, no paved road to fame. But there was something more complicated than all of that. There was a child who felt the distance between what she experienced and what she was allowed to say about it. The wound was not a single event, it was a condition. A pattern learned so early it felt like biology. Heather grew up understanding, with the wordless clarity that children absorb before they can analyze, that the room responded better to her when she was cheerful. When she smiled, tension dissolved. When she laughed, her father's jaw unclenched slightly. When she performed brightness, she received warmth in return. So, she practiced it, the way other children practice piano scales, daily, unconsciously, until it became automatic. Until she could no longer locate the boundary between the performance and herself. In school, she was not bullied in the conventional sense. The wound was more insidious. She was popular, included, admired, which meant she had even less permission to fall apart. The pretty, easy, smiling girl from the valley did not get to be confused or frightened or hollow. She had to be what people already decided she was. She learned very early that authenticity was a luxury reserved for those with fewer expectations placed upon them. Years later, she would confess with a voice that struggled to stay level, "I have never felt like I was enough," even when everything looked perfect. Especially then. At 17, Heather's first serious attempt to define herself on her own terms collided with the machinery of expectation. She enrolled at UCLA, her father's institution, intending to study psychology, something that would satisfy the unspoken contract of the family's respectable trajectory. But something kept pulling her elsewhere, toward performance, toward the one space where, paradoxically, wearing a mask felt more honest than showing her actual face. The academic path felt like a slow disappearing. And so, quietly, before anyone could frame it as a mistake, she began moving toward the camera. It was not a dramatic abandonment. There was no slammed door, no defiant speech. It was something quieter, and therefore more terrifying. A girl choosing, for the first time, to follow something she could not fully justify to anyone else. With a face that the camera seemed to recognize before she fully recognized herself, Heather began auditioning. She was 19. The industry welcomed her surface immediately and asked nothing about what was underneath. And in that transaction, something was established that would take decades to fully unravel. The world would love the image, and she would have to find a way to survive inside it. Her first breakthrough came not through careful planning, but through the ruthless efficiency of Hollywood's assembly line. In 1981, she landed a role on the police drama T.J. Hooker, opposite the already iconic William Shatner. She was 20 years old, playing Officer Stacy Sheridan, the pretty rookie navigating a male-dominated precinct with charm and competence. And when she stepped in front of those cameras for the first time, something extraordinary happened. The anxiety that followed her through ordinary life, the pressure to be pleasing, the terror of disappointing anyone, all of it vanished. The character she inhabited could be confident, vulnerable, complicated, without consequence. Heather Locklear, the person, still carried the weight of expectation, but Officer Stacy Sheridan was free. On that soundstage, under those lights, she could finally breathe. It wasn't talent yet. It was recognition. The silent, absolute certainty of having found the place where she belonged. Only she was free when pretending to be someone else. At 21, with TJ Hooker establishing her as a recognizable face, but not yet a star, Heather Locklear arrived at the crossroads that would define the next decade of her life. Hollywood in the early 1980s was not kind to women who wanted more than decorative roles. It was a city that ground down ambition slowly, with the cold indifference of a place that had already seen too many young women arrive with hope and leave with empty hands. But Heather had something the city couldn't quite dismiss, a face the camera loved and a work ethic inherited from a father who believed rest was indulgence. She took every offer. Guest spots on The Fall Guy, Chips, Fantasy Island. Small roles that paid little but kept her visible. She showed up early, learned her lines perfectly, smiled through dismissals, and never let anyone see the exhaustion that followed her home each night. There were moments when Los Angeles felt not like an opportunity, but like a trap. Auditions where casting directors looked past her to ask about her availability for parties. Roles written so thinly she could see through the pages. The creeping suspicion that she was succeeding only at becoming exactly what everyone expected her to be, beautiful, agreeable, and ultimately forgettable. In 1986, Heather made a decision that would alter her trajectory in ways she couldn't predict. She married Tommy Lee, the wild-hearted drummer of Mötley Crüe, in a ceremony that felt like a collision of two incompatible universes. She was the polished television actress. He was the embodiment of rock and roll chaos. The attraction was immediate, intense, and completely public. For 7 years, they were one of the most photographed couples in entertainment, the Golden Girl and the Bad Boy, a narrative so clean it felt written by publicists. But the price of living at that level of exposure is brutal, and no one warns you when you're climbing. The absences prolonged by filming schedules and endless tours. The priorities that separated like two rivers that share an origin but end in different seas. The growing realization that love, no matter how genuine at the start, cannot survive when two people are becoming themselves in opposite directions. In 1993, after 7 years of marriage, the union dissolved. The news circled the world in hours. The headlines were cruel with the characteristic coldness of media entertainment. For the world, it was just another Hollywood story. For Heather, it was the collapse of something she had built with her own hands, another confirmation that she could not hold together what mattered most. But just as one chapter closed, another exploded open with a force that would redefine her career. In 1993, Aaron Spelling cast her as Amanda Woodward in Melrose Place, a nighttime soap opera that was struggling to find its identity. Heather joined a cast that included Grant Show, Laura Leighton, Marcia Cross, and later Vanessa Williams, actors hungry for the same breakthrough she was chasing. Amanda Woodward was not Officer Stacy Sheridan. She was sharp, calculating, ruthless when necessary, the kind of woman who used her beauty as a weapon rather than a shield. And when Heather stepped into that role, something clicked. The show, which had been polite and forgettable, suddenly had teeth. Amanda Woodward became the center of gravity, the character everyone loved to hate and hated to love. Melrose Place exploded into a cultural phenomenon. By 1994, it was pulling in over 10 million viewers a week. Heather Locklear became not just a star but an icon, The face of a certain kind of 1990s power femininity, glamorous and dangerous in equal measure. She earned a reported $150,000 per episode at the peak, a fortune for someone who had spent years taking whatever was offered. And suddenly, the girl from Westwood who had learned to smile through discomfort was the most powerful woman on one of the most watched shows on television. The same critics who had once dismissed her as just another pretty face now called her magnetic, indispensable, the engine that made everything else work. But behind the red carpets and million-dollar contracts, something was beginning to crack. The performance that had saved her was now consuming her. She was Amanda Woodward to millions of people, and Heather Locklear to almost no one, including herself. The smile that had opened every door was now the mask she could not remove. In 1994, she met Richie Sambora, the guitarist for Bon Jovi, and for a moment it seemed like a second chance at the life that had failed with Tommy Lee. They married in Paris in 1994. For a decade, they were the picture of stability, or at least the version of stability that sells magazines. They had a daughter, Ava, in 1997, and Heather spoke publicly about finally finding balance, about motherhood softening the edges of ambition. But the same patterns returned. The schedules, the absences, the slow, silent erosion of intimacy. In 2006, after 12 years of marriage, Richie Sambora filed for divorce. The news devastated her in ways the public never fully understood. For the world, it was another headline. For Heather, it was the second time she had failed at the thing she wanted most, to be loved not for what she looked like, but for who she was underneath. And in the years that followed, the unraveling accelerated. Arrests for driving under the influence in 2008, hospitalizations for prescription drug overdoses, public breakdowns that were filmed, dissected, consumed as entertainment. The woman who had built her career on radiance was now famous for falling apart. Heather Locklear has survived what many do not: the complete public disintegration of the self and the slow, unglamorous work of rebuilding in the aftermath. She has been to rehab more than 20 times. She has faced charges, headlines, the particular cruelty of a culture that devours its icons and then mocks them for being human. Today, at 63, Heather Locklear lives quietly, far from the cameras that once defined her. Every step reminds her of the price she paid for a kind of fame that demanded everything and gave back only the image. The cost wasn't just professional: 2 failed marriages, a relationship with her daughter that required years of repair, a body and mind pushed past their limits in service of a smile that was never hers to begin with. And yet, Heather remains standing. Not as the untouchable Amanda Woodward of the screen, but as the woman who understood that real strength isn't never falling, it's getting up every time the world knocks you down. Her legacy isn't Melrose Place. It's the living proof that the performance we give the world is not the same as the life we live inside it, and that survival sometimes means letting the mask finally crack. From the child who learned to smile through silence to the icon who smiled through everything else, her legacy is proof that perfection is not the goal, only the prison. That scars don't disqualify us, they're what make us finally devastatingly real. What lesson do you take from Heather Locklear's story? How many times have you worn a smile that wasn't yours to keep the world comfortable? Share your reflections below and subscribe for more stories of those who transformed the breaking point into the beginning. Because in the end, as Amanda Woodward taught us on screen but Heather Locklear learned in life, the most dangerous lie is the one we tell ourselves when we forget who we were before the world decided who we should be.